A warm welcome to our afternoon session, all about place-based giving in London. So hopefully everyone is settled in. I'll just give it a minute for everybody to get settled. Okay, so while everyone gets sorted, I'll just give a brief introduction to London Funders and to the Festival of Learning that we've been hosting for the last couple of days. So welcome back if you've been joining other sessions during the festival so far, and if this is your first one, then it's really good to see you. So London Funders, as many of you will know, is the network for funders and investors across London. We exist to bring funders from all sectors together to be effective, focusing on collaboration. So bringing funders together to connect, cooperate, contribute together to help people in London to live better lives. So in that spirit, our Festival of Learning that we've been hosting for the last 4 or 5 days is bringing together our members to have chance to discuss, share insights, and reflect on all the different experiences and learning, the challenges of the last year, to talk about what's gone well, what we want to do differently, and hopefully use that as a springboard for positive change as we move forward to the next phase of London's recovery. So very warm welcome. It's lovely to, well, we can't see you, but it's lovely that you've joined us. So on that, a very short practical note. This is a webinar format, so although you can see us, we can't see you. We have therefore got the chat panel and the Q&A, so please do use those to share reflections as we go, and also any questions that you might want to bring to the panel as we move through the session. We've got just under an hour. We're not too tight on time today, but we'll try and wrap up just before 5. If you're tweeting during the session, please use the hashtag London Learn Fest. We very much kind of want to keep the conversation going. So without further ado, I'm going to properly introduce the rest of the panel. So I'm really delighted that we've got Cameron from Barking and Dagenham Giving, Danielle from Camden Giving, and we're also going to be joined by Victoria from the Kensington and Chelsea Foundation, who is going to be with us very shortly. So today's session, all about place-based giving in London. I joined London Funders in November, and one of the many pleasures of my role is overseeing the London's giving network and London Funders programme of work to support the development and sustainability of place-based giving schemes across the capital. So at London Funders, we believe place-based giving's got huge potential, and with the support from the City Bridge Trust, we run the London's Giving programme to bring together schemes so we can network, share knowledge, and also advocate for the role that place-based giving can play in the wider kind of civil society and policy agenda. And what we wanted to do today was really kind of share our reflections, and it's good that we've got, we want to couldn't bring all of the schemes together for a session, but representation from the London's Giving network to talk about what we've learned over the past year, both in terms of the schemes themselves, but also the communities in which they work. We want to kind of share the latest picture of what's happening, but also inspire other funders, other partners to get involved, learn more about it, and hopefully carry on some of those conversations after the session. So in terms of the format, I'm going to do kind of quick sort of 5–10 minutes just to set the context and give a very brief overview of what we really mean by place-based giving. And then I'm going to hand over to the panel to introduce their schemes in a bit more detail. And then we're going to move into a kind of more informal conversation between us I've got a long list of questions I'd like to ask them, but we'd also really like questions from you. So yeah, just a reminder, please use the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure that we can field those as we go on. Okay, so I am just going to quickly share my screen, which hopefully, yep, you can all see. Okay, and we're not going to do too many slides, so fear not, but we just thought people be coming at this from different places, so we want to give you a bit more context about the London's Giving Network and what we mean by place-based giving in London. So before we start, we've got a couple of polls. So Grace, are you able to launch the first one for us? You should see. So we'd like to sort of see who's in the room. What's your link with place-based giving? So you might be already directly involved in a scheme, funding a scheme, involved as a partner or collaborator. You're not involved, but you know a bit about it, or it's something that you're new to. So the one that closest matches, please take a minute to vote, and then we'll Grace can share the results. Okay, so hopefully you can see those. So we've got, about just over a third of people directly involved in giving schemes, a couple of funders, which is great, some other partners and collaborators, and also a couple of newbies. So that's good, a real mix of people. Could you launch the second poll, Grace? So the second one I want to ask is just to get your sense of thinking about place-based giving. What do you most associate with it? So we'd like you to select up to 3 of these options. Give you a couple of minutes to read through those. Okay. Thanks, Grace. You were able to share the results. Okay, so interesting. So we've got participatory models of funding coming out as something that people most associate with place-based giving, closely followed by grant making to local organisations, collaborative working, advocating for social change locally. So a bit of a spread. That's great. And the caveat is all of those things are to do with place-based giving. So it was a slightly trick question, but I guess an attempt to try and get across the many different sides to place-based giving and the many different roles and functions that they have as schemes in local places. So you move on. I can. So there's many different kind of aspects to it, and as I mentioned, London Funders has been running the London's Giving programme for a number of years now, and we launched a report in the summer of last year, so timed well with the pandemic, to draw together our learning. So, and that report, one of the key kind of messages from that was, it's not about what you do, but how you do it. So place-based giving kind of seen very often sort of inspired by Islington Giving, which was one of the first schemes in London, certainly. There are now 14 active place-based giving schemes in our network, and many more in development or hoping to start soon. They all are kind of, I guess, built on the core premise that everyone has something to give, whether that's time, talent, resources, and place-based giving schemes come together through a collaborative way of working to try and harness all of those assets and think about the best way to invest and tap in and support them within a local community. So as I mentioned, the sort of principles, if you like, underpinning place-based giving that we've drawn out from the many years of doing the London's Giving programme are listed up here. So as well as that idea that everyone has something to give, it's about a shared understanding of local aspirations and needs, something that's not just driven by donors or funders. It's about listening to local people, encouraging them to be involved in decision making, both about where money is invested, but also in how programs are designed. It's about collaboration, so core to place-based giving, collaborating with different partners to find better ways to improve places. So that's both within the funding community, statutory partners, community groups, grassroots organisations, businesses, a whole range of partners locally. And in that vein, the idea that it's independent from any one stakeholder, all those partners having an equal voice in how things are developed. What that looks like in practice, yes, that's some of the things that we just had in the poll. So grant programs, volunteering, in-kind support from businesses, partnerships, strategic partnerships with local authorities, as well as local campaigning and attempts to work differently with local communities and particularly reach groups who otherwise might not have access to funding. So there's a diagram to try and put that in a visual form, which we've sort of talked through much of that. I suppose it's just worth stressing really, it's kind of the idea of collaboration really being at the heart of how place-based giving works. The idea of that partnership of unusual suspects, so working differently with different community groups and really looking at how to engage, how to listen differently, and how to devolve some of that power with different local people. So let me move on. Very slow computer. So over the last couple of years, we've been working with Rocket Science as our learning partner to kind of gather information and data about place-based giving schemes and their impact within local areas. This kind of typology just really reflects the reality that although we're talking about a network of place-based giving across London, we're also talking about very different schemes. We're talking about different local authority areas where the context is different. There's different infrastructure, there's a different funding environment, there's different levels of need, there's different communities who have different aspirations themselves. So we sort of talk about a network, but also just that recognition of that diversity. You know, we believe that diversity is its strength, but it's also reflecting in reality the kind of wider infrastructure and conditions in which place-based giving is working. So I'll leave that up, but it's just that kind of reflection that often the absence or the presence of other local funders, of businesses, you know, what that corporate business sector might be like, local populations, whether there's CVS support, all kind of impact on the way that place-based giving has developed across our network over the last few years. So what's the impact been? This is some of the information that we've worked with Rocket Science to collect over the last few years, just to give you a flavour of kind of what we're talking about. And obviously the main point is behind these numbers are obviously a lot of individuals, a lot of organisations who've been supported, but also who are working in partnership with place-based giving schemes across London. So the numbers, you know, we're really proud of these numbers and the impact that shows, but obviously there's a lot more behind them. So over the last 3 years, sort of nearly £10 million has been generated in income, nearly 9 million of grants given, in-kind support and volunteering through many different schemes and programmes that place-based giving schemes have brokered. It's also worth noting this is a slight underestimation, and because it's based on 10 schemes rather than the full network, so we'll be a conservative estimate. In the last year, this is just to show really how much the network's grown within the last, 12 months from 2019 to 2020. Almost half of that income was raised. So there's been a kind of real exponential growth really in quite a short space of time. And it's worth pointing out that particularly during COVID, that kind of proved a catalyst for many schemes, which hopefully, our panel can reflect on shortly. One sort of final infographic just to kind of get across this idea of the collaborations and the stakeholders and partners that place-based giving schemes work with. It's fair to say it's across all different levels and different ways that these kind of partnerships have developed. So in the key there, you can see this is not just around funding, it's also around brokering opportunities for volunteers, access to networks and in-kind support, a lot of engagement with micro businesses, community organisations, the public sector, and that's something that I think certainly we're really proud of, this idea of coming together to look at different ways of tackling social change. So, final slide was just to sort of lead into our discussion with the panel with some of the reflections from our side as London funders and the rocket science evaluation that we've noticed from the last year. I think we're seeing a lot more growth in participant-led approaches and participatory grant making. So it's interesting that that came up #1 in the poll just now, and this idea of how we can best support local people to be involved in what we do. How to capitalise on the desire to give that many schemes saw during the pandemic, which also brought its own challenges, but how can we, I think communities are thinking differently about their local place now and their local community. So how can we capitalise on this? The role that place-based giving schemes can play, shining a light on widening inequality in place. So again, this has possibly been accelerated by the pandemic, but certainly inequalities existed long before that. So being a very local funder who understands the community, and what role can we play there? Accelerating collaboration. Over the last few days in the festival, there's been a lot of discussion around trust and relationships in funding. And I think many schemes have reflected that the last year in particular has accelerated that in many places. I'm looking at who now are the partners that we want to sort of build on. And the final point is it's continually evolving and it can take time. So this is a journey that's kind of ongoing, and there's many sort of shapes and tangents that often, we would go off on, but it's exciting to see where we will be heading next. And I hope to draw that out from our panel shortly. So I'm going to stop sharing there and ask each of our panel members, so welcome Victoria as well, to just start off in sort of a couple of minutes to tell us a bit more about your scheme, the approach you've taken to place-based giving, given we've sort of set it in that context of that diversity. And I wonder who, Danielle, can I ask you to go first?
Yeah, I was going to vote myself to go first anyway. Hi, welcome everybody. I can't see everybody, but it's nice to join you all. So I work at Camden Giving. I'm the assistant director, and we were set up back in 2017 as a place-based giving organisation for the Borough of Camden, because although it's a really vibrant, diverse place with a huge amount of assets, there's a huge amount of inequality that sits in contrast with that. A third of young people who live in the borough live in poverty. Only 7% of jobs go to local people, and there's huge wealth and kind of health inequalities that exist as well. So we were set up to kind of convene all of the assets and brilliant things that are happening to break down barriers and open up new opportunities to people people who are often locked out of decisions and changes that are happening in their borough. And for us, we primarily fundraise through businesses and our local authority partners to give grants to community organisations and primarily small grassroots charities that are locked out of a lot of the funding that exists nationally and globally. And what makes us slightly different is that we use a participatory grant making approach, which we only found out a couple of years ago. That was the kind of official term for it. So we're doing it since inception. So basically our trustees devolve all of their decision making powers in relation to grant giving to panels of community representatives. And we've worked with around 75 so far, who have awarded collectively around £4.5 million into their communities, and they have complete autonomy over their decisions, and they work with us, and we pay and train them to co-design the grant programs and criteria based on their local insight and knowledge, and that then influences our wider work that we do as well. And we do have an animation which one of our generous business supporters has put together for us, which will probably add a little bit more colour to what I'm trying to tell you we do. So Helen, if it's okay, do you mind just showing it? It's only a minute and a half, I think. See if it works. We can't hear the sound. I don't know. That might just be me though.
Let me see. Was anyone else having sound issues?
Yeah, I couldn't hear it.
We'll give that
when you share it, Helen, there's a little tick box at the bottom that says play sound through the so something like that. Yeah, it's like share sound. There's a little tick box.
Got you. I hope we can get that going for you. Just bear with us a moment.
I don't think it's going to work for us. No worries. Anyway, you can find the animation on our website, which explains in more detail who we work with and our kind of approach to grant making. But we've worked with a huge number of really amazing local residents, and we see obviously Camden Civil Society not just as the residents and brilliant voluntary sector organisations, but also our strategic partners across the borough who we work with, to make sure that we are making sure participation is equitable across the borough of Camden. So that's a little bit about us, Helen. I didn't know if you wanted me to go into more detail.
That's great, and I apologise for the sound.
That's okay.
We'll see if we can get that sorted and play it at the end of the session. No, that's great. Thank you, Danielle. Can I ask Cameron, do you want to talk a bit about Barking and Dagenham?
Sure, thanks, Helen. Yes, so I'm from Barking, Dagenham Giving. I'm Cameron. I'm the Learning and Participation Manager there. Obviously people have already alluded to this already, but we believe that people affected by funding decisions should be the ones making those decisions. So since our inception, we've been a participatory grant maker. So Barking, Dagenham Giving formally launched last summer. Spun out of a DCMS project and an existing charitable trust in the borough that sort of come together. But we had a bit of a baptism by fire, sort of coming together last year. It's with the lockdown. And so what our aim is to try and enable anyone who has a stake in the borough to try and take part in creating meaningful change. And we do that through three means, which is collaborating with local people and organisations, sharing decision-making powers, and giving resources to the causes that matter to the people in the community. So as I said, bit of a big launch last year. We were very lucky to have the support of the Untitled Chapter Foundation. So with them, we ran a rapid response fund last year over summer, where we worked with about 40 people from the borough who all online came together, designed the process to give out the funding. We then recruited about 15 local decision makers who were paid and trained for their time. And they gave away 23 grants, sort of averaging about £4,000. But over the course of last year, we gave away just over £200,000. So the bulk of that was that 100k pot. We also gave away a £60,000 fund from Clear Channel that went to 2 groups in the community. And we also have a modest income, which we distributed in further COVID relief grants just a few months ago, again using sort of participatory means. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of where we're at now. It's quite an exciting time for us. At the end of last year, we had got the agreement of the council to transfer an endowment fund to us, which is going to be a legacy for the community, and every part of the process. So from how the money is actually invested to also how any returns that come out of it get spent is all going to be participatory. We've got a whole sort of 12-month program sort of set up about how we're going to engage with the community and try and build up levels of engagement and really sort of cement the endowment fund as something that is community owned and community led.
Brilliant, thanks Cameron. And Victoria from Kensington and Chelsea Foundation, can I pass over to you to tell us a bit about your scheme?
Sure, I've got a really dodgy cough, so I apologise if I end up hacking through this, but I will do my best. I've got a pint of water. So we are the Kensington and Chelsea Foundation. We're probably a bit older than some of the other schemes. We've been running since 2008. We're completely separate from the council. We're an independent charity that was set up by a local resident in the borough who was just really aware of the inequalities. So I don't know if you know much about our borough, but when you say Kensington and Chelsea, people think about Chelsea footballers living there, the Beckhams living there, David Cameron living there, and that obviously is part of the picture, but it's also the location of the Grenfell Tower, which has become a kind of a shining light exposing the inequality in our borough. So we have, I believe, the worst inequality in the whole of London, if not the country, and that's really illustrated by the fact that 50% of our kids are going to private schools, but 25% of kids are living in poverty. So that there's a really kind of extreme gap between rich and poor. And there are other issues like social isolation. We have a really high proportion of single households, which in lockdown was really challenging because we knew there were lots of people living alone and at risk of isolation and mental health problems because of that. So how we've worked is since 2008, we've raised funding from local people, specifically high net worth individuals, family trusts and corporates. And then we've spent that money on partnering with local organisations, nearly always, but not exclusively, grassroots partners who can help us achieve the impact that we want to achieve in the borough and try and make it a fairer place for residents to live. So we have 11 board members and 9 of them are local residents. We're not as far down our participatory grant making journey as some of the others. We've kind of dipped a toe in the water, particularly with our youth grant making, and we had 3 young people come and sit on a panel, which was brilliant, to decide which organisations were going to get 3-year grants for youth work. And that really helped us to see the benefit of young people's involvement, and it's definitely something we want to do more of in the future. In terms of COVID-19, what we've learned, I guess, is, and I know it sounds really obvious, but how willing people are to support their communities. COVID-19's really refocused everybody in a hyper-local way that's been really beneficial for us. So we were able to raise 1.9 million last financial year, so ending March, which is more than double what we would usually raise. And we've been able to use that with London Community Response Fund to get that money out really quickly to frontline organisations in a way that didn't compromise our due diligence. So that was fantastic, and definitely something we would want to repeat if there were any other kind of emergency situations again. In terms of moving forward, the other thing it's enabled us to do is really test and grow our supporter base. So because everything was changing so quickly during COVID-19, and we were getting grants out quickly, we had reasons to keep going back to our supporters and update them and give them kind of feedback from the front line, I guess. And that was really beneficial in building relationships with people we hadn't heard from ages, making the database, the supporter base much more active again. And I think that's really going to pay dividends now when we start moving into more recovery and trying to get them to fund our kind of core projects. Is that about everything you wanted us to cover, Helen?
That's great. Thank you, Victoria. So now we're gonna sort of move into a bit of a conversation between us as a panel. So I'm gonna sort of kick off, and as I said, it would be great if participants want to have a think of any questions or reflections they want to ask as well, and pop those in the Q&A. But I suppose you've all sort of touched on the last year and COVID and the pandemic being a kind of touch point in different ways. I just wondered if anyone wanted to talk a bit more about the sort of biggest change that's brought to the way that you're working as a scheme, or has it kind of changed the priorities that you've got in terms of reaching and funding local groups? Anyone want to take that one? Yep, Cameron, go for it.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the biggest challenges we faced was Barking Dagenham has a very low rate of internet connectivity. It's quite a digitally excluded borough. I've seen estimates of about 50% of the population don't have regular access to the internet, when so much of our activity had to move on, well, all of our activity move online. Created a real sort of challenge. So what we're sort of looking forward to is be able to get back in person and find out community, because we were sort of having to rely quite heavily on people who were doing face-to-face engagement, and sort of using them as ways to bring in different perspectives, when what we sort of want to move towards is actually how do we engage people sort of who are sort of facing disadvantages in different ways. There was just a whole collection of people that we're sort of very aware that we just weren't able to hear from. I think that was probably the biggest challenge that we face of everything we did, as positive as it was, as exciting as it was to sort of get money out there and get people involved and get them making decisions. There was always this thing of, who isn't in the room, who are we not able to engage with?
Yeah, that was definitely a key thing for us as well. I think like nobody could have anticipated the kind of pandemic and crisis that everyone faced, and I think right at the beginning it was so focused on fundraising, getting grants out, but actually we were missing that bit of okay, there are so many people who aren't online or don't have safe spaces to even have discussions, and particularly just with our panelists who a lot of them had lost their jobs or were living in overcrowded accommodation. Like, it was all these extra considerations that we needed to kind of make sure we were considering, to make sure that they felt fully supported in their roles as well, so that they could then make the best collective decisions for their community members. And I think definitely for us, like, resourcing the kind of digital divide is something that we've now factored into how we're moving forward, because we know that this isn't going to go away. People are still recovering from the digital divide, and people are still going to need support to work remotely as well, and where we are going to probably have to adapt to doing like a hybrid way of participatory grant making in the kind of next year or so. We've had to fundraise more to make sure that we can get laptops and devices or just Wi-Fi connections to those people as well. And I think definitely for us, like, where we have been working with local panelists to make decisions, like, they've been able to really inform us of what is really needed on a hyper local level, because from one ward to the next it looks very different. So having a real mix of voices and lived experiences to help influence our work has actually helped us move forward with our kind of approaches to funding as well. So I think definitely we are kind of on the same page, Cameron, I think, with that. And even like again, going back to the digital divide, I think some of our work, you know, or a lot of it is focused around volunteering and like skilled volunteering. One big challenge that we had as well was seeing a drop of volunteers from local businesses who weren't, you know, in Camden anymore, who were being furloughed, who, you know, were really uncertain in terms of their own futures and jobs. So we saw a real kind of dip in, you know, volunteering, but a spike in giving in different ways. So people wanting to give, you know, not necessarily their time, but financially, other resources. Some businesses had, you know, their food hampers that they wanted to give, or they had, you know, tech and laptops that they could give out to the community, delivery drivers. So we saw a real kind of different shift in kind of the way that people were giving, as well. They're kind of things that people still want to replicate and bring forward with, you know, how we can support businesses to invest locally. It's through us as like a convener and a broker of all different opportunities, and hopefully we'll see a rise back in, yeah, more skilled volunteering again, as people are going back to a bit of normality. There are a few key takeaways for us at Camden Giving as well.
Thanks, Danny. Victoria, did you want to add anything to this one?
Slightly missed your question actually, because it sounds a bit dodgy. Sorry, could you?
Sorry, we were just sort of reflecting on sort of the biggest sort of changes or challenges from the last year, and specifically if that's sort of changed the way that you work as a funder and as a place-based giving scheme.
So as a team, we found it really hard to work from home and just not be in the community that we love and that we're trying to serve. We found that really difficult, to feel cut off. And it was kind of okay at first because we were just so busy trying to deal with the community response. But you know, a year's a long time, so we're all really looking forward to kind of getting back into the community and having that connection again with all the partners, because it's such a big part of what we do. And to be honest, before COVID-19, we didn't really fund food projects. It just wasn't a priority for us. It didn't fit in with any of our categories. And most of the COVID-19 funding was spent on either food delivery services to elderly people, or food banks, or Christmas parcels to families in financial hardship. So we've learned a lot more about that kind of provision in our borough and where the gaps are. And we were able to start we really saw our role actually in joining people together. So I think I've mentioned to you before, Helen, that, for example, 2 organisations applied to us to run a food bank on the same estate, and we were able to put them in touch with each other and say, look, don't duplicate, share resources and do something together, and then we'll fund it, which was really useful. And just to keep connecting organisations, I think when we could see the benefit of them working together to serve similar communities was really good, and definitely something we'd want to continue doing.
Brilliant, thank you. We've had a couple of questions from people listening, which I'll bring in now. The first was from Eleanor, which is a nice segue from that point around collaboration, because it's how do you navigate and define the giving scheme's place amongst the CVS, local funders and government, and direct relationships between corporates and charities? So I don't know if anybody wants to have a go at that one. Victoria?
I'm happy to have a go. I mean, we really do see ourselves as a private foundation, and we earn every penny, or we raise every penny ourselves. And so we set our own agenda. We decide the issues that we think are the most important and the impact we want to have, and we fund them using the partners that we trust, and ideally we introduce to new ones where possible. So, I mean, we talk to the council and we talk to other funders about what they're doing. A lot of them come to us for information about what's going on in the borough, and, you know, asking for recommendations of particular charities. So I think they recognise that we have quite a lot of expertise, particularly with the smaller grassroots charities that they're not aware of. I think that's a kind of a really important role to play, and we're just about to launch a big research project that will identify some of the key needs in our borough, looking at both data and kind of qualitative, research. So I think that will be a resource for everybody who funds activity in our borough to share, but it will be owned by us, and it will inform our grant making priorities for the next sort of 3 to 5 years.
Great, thank you. Cameron or Danny, do you want to?
Yeah, we've got a slightly different sort of model. So, I mean, yesterday, so Giraud, who's the chief executive of BD Giving, and a few others, they presented at this festival, what is a sort of a new partnership model way of working. So that's involving ourselves, a group called the BD Collective, which is sort of network of networks on a local level, the Barking Enterprise Centre, and also the CVS. You can read, if you go on our website, there's a sort of recent post about what this collaboration sort of looks like. And we do have a close relationship with the council, partly because of, like, as I mentioned before, where we've sort of come out from as a charity. But what we're trying to do is sort of to create a sort of different pole for power. Has been quite, if I think the meeting yesterday was recorded, so I do suggest for a fuller picture if it is interesting to you. But power was traditionally quite consolidated on the council, and they're trying to move away from this paternalism. So what we're trying to do is to sort of make sure that happens and sort of shift power with this partnership model, and also to try and avoid basically sort of replicating that or just becoming a sort of another layer of bureaucracy in the borough. So it's all about sort of how do we use this position and this model of collaboration and sort of sharing data and information, so that when local people sort of look at Barking and Dagenham, they can see the whole picture, or they can start to see more of it and understand it more. Because I think part of where people are approaching it from now is information is concentrated around individuals, and there's a real need to sort of make sure that that information is widespread, that it's not just kept in one person's head. So that's the model that we're sort of trying to work towards and try and encourage collaboration, and as much as possible move away from competition. And that's sort of where we see place-based giving as having a big advantage. Is, if we're seeing Barking Dagenham as a place, as a system in and of itself, then how do we resource that? What needs to be in place? How do we get people to sort of share resources and start to trust and start to sort of be quite open and honest about what their needs are, and what where they come into conflict with people, and how do we sort of start to resolve that or find a way forward?
Thank you. So, yeah, I think though the idea of the role that you play as a place-based giving scheme, and seeing the whole needs of that local area, I think is a really key one. I'm going to just bring in another question, because I wonder, Danny, if this one might come to you, and that's around the incentives for local people, and specifically young people. What you offer in terms of them being involved in participatory funding?
Yeah, of course. So we first established our Future Changemakers Fund, which is basically a group of 10 to 15 young people aged 16 to 25 from across the borough, who come together, who we pay and train as grant panelists to make decisions on which organisations they want to fund, with a lens of kind of improving youth safety across the borough. And we work with them in a way that's kind of quite very person-centred and holistic. We want to make sure that the young people who are often locked out of decisions have true kind of autonomy, and actually feel like that they are influencing decisions, at a local level. And one way that we make sure that they feel really valued and actually are compensated for their time, their knowledge. I think a lot of young people are often asked for, their insights and their time, but aren't often, kind of compensated for that. So we pay all of our community members, and we pay them through a way that works for them. So sometimes, a gift voucher might work for some of them, but the majority of the time we try and pay them directly into their bank, because we see, their role is you know, they are actually, they're grant makers, and you know, we as Camden Giving staff are paid for, you know, the work that we do. We want to make sure that that is replicated as a value and a principle through our work. One thing that we have learned and that we've had to be really careful about is how the pay actually impacts on them, you know, and their benefits or their welfare, because a lot of the time, you know, if somebody is on universal credit and they are getting an income, it might actually mean that they aren't able to access that anymore. So we really try and kind of work with that individual to make sure that they are compensated properly, and that works for them. We also work really closely with them to, you know, find out what they want beyond their role as panelists as well. So we, you know, want to make sure that we are deepening their pathways beyond being community panelists through looking at how we can, you know, help them access other forms of power and participation in the borough and access other opportunities. For one person, it might be that they want to, you know, access a particular type of, I don't know, industry or job. So we will actually work with our business partners to find kind of a bespoke way to support them into that sort of industry or gain those particular skills. And for others, you know, they want to be working with other grant makers to kind of influence their decisions as well. So from that, we've actually established a participation advisors program where we are actually bringing a pool of our existing panelists together, and most of them are our young grant makers, to work with other London funders and other giving organisations to actually advise on their grant giving style and evolving their participatory grant making. So it's finding, you know, the kind of kind of real kind of personalised approaches for our young people, and for a lot of them it is around employment. So we try and make sure that we're connecting them to employers and CV development, but it's really just taking that person-centered approach for us. And a lot of the time, you know, we are working with youth service partners as well on our funds, who actually provide an additional layer of pastoral support to make sure that they are kind of supported, you know, beyond their roles as grant makers too. So that's a bit about how we work with young people at Camden Giving.
And I was just going to follow that, Danny, just to say that on the London's Giving website, Camden Giving produced earlier in the year a toolkit around participatory grant making, kind of which gives a really good overview of the approach, but also some very practical kind of pointers for funders at whatever stage you are in thinking around participatory funding. So yeah, do check that out as well. There's another question from Joe. So this is around what advice you'd give to funders new to this area who are looking to adopt a more place-based approach, and in particular any lessons from working on place-based initiatives with funders who do not know the local area or community well. Before I come to the panel, I was just going to sort of respond to that from sort of that overview of having worked with the London's Giving Network. And I think, you know, several schemes across the network are working very closely with other funders at the moment, including kind of, you know, larger funders who've devolved some of their grant making to local place-based giving schemes, because they want to reach that community. In particular, often it's the smaller grassroots groups, but they don't have that local presence, and that's, I think, one of the, you know, real values that place-based giving schemes have been able to play, is working with other funders, either in terms of devolving some of that grant making capacity, but also advising on where there might be areas of need, and working collaboratively. So I'm going to throw that in from the sort of overall view, but does anyone else want to add to that? Cameron?
Yeah, I think sort of just to build on what you were saying, Helen, you know, we and other place-based giving schemes, we're doing the work of building their reputation as a trusted local partner, and one that's able to be incredibly responsive to local need. From a Barking Dagenham perspective, what we've seen is, as a result, is that it means that people and organisations have been funded, which are probably not visible if they're seen through a national or regional lens. So, you know, if they're organisations that matter to local people, but, you know, to someone who isn't familiar with the area, you might sort of scratch your head about, you know, why this matters to people. And I think if you're a funder sort of looking about place-based giving, is to sort of see what is happening already in the area, to draw on that knowledge. Because if there's already sort of stuff in place, that sort of coming alongside as a funder with existing place-based giving schemes, I think is sort of part of this sort of message of collaboration and cohesion. You know, the process, every part of the process that is part of the outcome. If as a funder you're able to come in and say, we worked with this local place-based giving scheme, and together, you know, we shared learning, we shared resources, we shared our network. This is the sort of outcome, both in terms of who we got to reach, in terms of who got involved in the process, but also where that money goes to, where the money sort of trickles down to. So yeah, I think the question for funders, if you want to get into place-based giving, is to really sort of think about what is it that you want your money to do. If you want to reach down on a local level, and if you want that money to, you know, bring people together in a community, then I would say to look to stuff that's already in place. But if that thing doesn't exist, then I think, just looking back at our own history, it's that I'd say sort of pick a place to start. You know, if there aren't place-based giving schemes, are there organisations in the borough that are doing similar enough work that you could maybe sort of work with them to support that development locally, rather than starting from scratch yourself?
Thank you. Victoria or Danny, do you want to add anything?
I was just going to echo what, oh sorry Victoria.
Oh, sorry Danny, go ahead.
That's okay. And I was just going to echo what Cameron said about using strategic partners. I think we like to see ourselves as like a knowledge partner, rather than just like, you know, a function of giving money out into the community. And we've had to do quite a lot of educating businesses and the local authority is like to see our value. And actually, you know, we do have that really hyper local insight, and we have trust with the community. You know, just thinking about relationships, you know, sometimes quite political, between the community, voluntary sector and local authority. Like, we can be that kind of middleman, I suppose, to make sure that, you know, we are investing money properly, and, you know, it really does reflect the needs of the community that we're working with. And I think a lot of communities and voluntary sector organisations are experiencing consultation fatigue. And I think, you know, actually, if there is a new funder coming into, you know, a place and wants to kind of start from scratch, I think actually, working really closely with knowledge partners and existing strategic, you know, partners to make a start is a good approach. So yeah, it's just a few insights, I think, from our experience as well.
Thanks, Danny. Victoria, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I think just to add and to agree with what the others have said, understanding the local context is really important, and that does take quite a lot of time. I've been in this job for a year and a half, and it took me quite a long time to get to grips with the local politics, and it's not actually very nice, some of it. But it's really important to understand it, because then you start to understand the tensions between why some organisations just will not collaborate with each other, and there's all sorts of historical reasons why that might be, and it might make sense to you that they should just work together, but they're not, and that's going to need working through, and etc. So that kind of stuff can be a little bit complicated, but it's just important to understand how you can add value in terms of the funding landscape. So, for example, we've recently launched a fairly modest in size innovation and collaboration fund, because we were just aware that there are so few funders willing to take a risk on new ideas, and all of us are dealing with social problems that have been around forever. If we knew how to fix them, it would be done by now. If it was just a question of chucking money at a solution. So we really want our charities to be able to try new things and test new things, and not be scared of telling us if they didn't work, because there's lots of learning in that. So we've launched quite a small fund, just because we didn't have enough money first time around, to enable them to test new projects, or test ways of working collaboratively with each other to try and tackle a problem in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing as well, Victoria, is about that site risk, and particularly supporting smaller grassroots organisations, which we know a lot of more established larger funders often don't have that kind of trust and support that we can help facilitate. And I think with the grassroots organisations that we work with, we can have a really honest, open conversation with them about their challenges and struggles, and they've actually asked us, some of our grantees, to set up kind of peer networking groups so that we can problem solve together and actually work out, how we can be building capacity across our grassroots, our grantee organisations better, so that they can find ways to work better together and more collaboratively as well, and still take risks, but we can also support them with a bit of problem solving and finding what will work, so that they can then go and apply for funding elsewhere or through us as well. And I think that being less risk adverse is definitely something that's helped with our success, I think.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. I don't want us to run over too long, although I'd quite like to stay and carry on the questions. But there's one more that's been posted in the Q&A. So I'm just going to check from participants if there's any other burning questions that you'd like to add those in now. And I'm going to combine this question with kind of one final one from me. And so feel free to answer both or either panel. So the question from one of the attendees is, what's your interaction or relationship with locally focused crowdfunding platforms? So interesting in this context of tapping into local giving. And my question that I was going to sort of ask you all was, where next for place-based giving? I think we've sort of reflected on it's been a challenging year, but in a way, a year that's sped up maybe quite a lot of growth or activity around place-based giving. Schemes, as we referred earlier, at different stages, but I know a lot are kind of quite ambitious for what happens next and how they want to kind of move forward, and particularly working with different partners locally to tackle some of the problems which, as Victoria, you've just said, have been around for a long time. So how can we sort of take a different approach? So crowdfunding and what's next? They're your two final questions. Anyone want to go first?
Unfortunately, we don't have any experience really with locally focused crowdfunding platforms, so I'm so sorry I can't help answer that question, but I'll just move on in case the other two have any more experience. But for us, the more grassroots organisations that we fund, I think we're seeing more and more need to actually support grassroots organisations who don't, have a bank account, or who are truly resident led, who often struggle to find a partner to hold their grant if we are awarding them funding. So one thing that we are trying to evolve at the moment is looking at how we can be supporting them better, and we have kind of a bit of an ambition to set up a community bank, so that we can actually hold the grants of unconstituted organisations and actually take the risk away from other organisations who might be holding their grant, and provide wraparound support for them as well through peer networking, and kind of connecting and establishing networks across more resident-led initiatives as well. So we really kind of will support them with their safeguarding and setting up insurance, establishing themselves as charities if that's the direction that they want to go, alongside capacity building as well. And also we launched earlier this year our first ever unrestricted grants programme, which is, as you can imagine, the most in-demand programme we've ever had, hugely oversubscribed. So we are really focusing on partnerships with businesses in Camden who want to be giving differently and taking a bit more risk in not necessarily knowing what their funding is going to go towards, but for us they are the two kind of key things that we're working on at the moment at Camden Giving.
Great, thank you. Any final thoughts, Cameron or Victoria?
Yeah, I think so. We've had some experience with crowdfunding in various sort of iterations, both as us and in the borough. Our experience has been, so Barking Dagenham is, I think I'm right in saying it's one of the most economically equal boroughs in the country, but is not a rich borough, so there's not a lot of wealth disparity. And I think the problem that we sort of had trying to reframe, like, what do we mean by giving? Is it right to ask a borough that doesn't have a lot of wealth to sort of give to causes, or is that where we shift our focuses to asking people who have wealth to give that wealth? So I think in terms of crowdfunding, I think we've always been quite careful about what sort of burden that puts on people. I mean, I've worked for the charities in the past. I've run successful crowdfunding campaigns, and it's quite exhausting. It's probably more exhausting than any other bit I've done, because you have to be pretty much relentless. If you're raising £100,000, you're trying to get a tenner from 10,000 people. Like, that's a lot of people to convince to part with their money. I think in terms of what next for us. So at the start, I mentioned about the sort of the Endowment Fund. We're really excited about that, and especially already, without us any sort of prompting, the community has already said, can we look into like local investment models? What does that start to look like? How do we do this ethically? How do we do this in a way that isn't detrimental to Barking Dagenham now and in the future? So that's really, really exciting, and we want more people to sort of get involved with that and sort of look to sort of, similar to what sort of Danielle was saying, is this something that the community could also invest in? Can you put your money away for a while with a return? What does community wealth building start to look like in that context? And then we're also pleased that Lankelly Chase has, off the back of the Rapid Response Fund, they've committed to more funding over the next sort of 2 years, which our aim for that is to try and build on the lessons learned of the Rapid Response Fund. So we've gone back to the community and said, look, this is what we don't want, is for this to be divided up into small pots. Because as sort of Victoria said, there's some things you just can't chuck. You can sort of put stuff through and chuck in small pots of money. We want to say to them, actually, you've got a sort of blank checkbook here. What does that look like? Where, these are the things that you keep saying you need. We've got resources to put behind that. So we're really excited about what sort of comes next with that.
Brilliant, exciting times. That's really good. Victoria?
So I'm afraid I've never done a crowdfunder, not in this capacity anyway. We've done a lot of public-facing fundraising appeals using, I think it's called Virgin Giving, and our website that have been really successful digital campaigns. But that's been within our own supporter base. So we happen to we're lucky enough to have a relatively small but relatively wealthy base of supporters who are happy to click on a button and donate, which is great for us. In terms of what's next, I think all of us as place-based giving schemes have really demonstrated over the past year our value in terms of getting money to the organisations on the front line that really need it and who don't normally access funds because they're very small, they don't have paid fundraising teams, they don't know how to access that kind of money. And I think it's a real shame that none of the statutory money that was trumpeted earlier last year ever reached any of us or our partners. I know it's certainly never reached any of the small organisations in our borough, and I think that's a really missed opportunity. So I'd like to see our value being recognised more widely, and I'd like to see us accessing some of that kind of either National Emergencies Trust funding or government funding in these kinds of situations, because I think we can get it to the right people much quicker and more efficiently than anyone else can.
Thank you. That's good words to end on. What I want to just try and do is to wrap up and just let the people listening to us a couple of places where you can go for more information, because I feel we're just scratching the surface of place-based giving and we'd love to tell you more. So the London's Giving website, do check that out. There's lots of resources on there, the previous reports that we've done looking at the learning and toolkits. I mentioned the participatory grant making one. So lots of material on there. So do have a look. And we also have a newsletter that goes out within our membership, but also more widely for people involved or interested in place-based giving. So do get in touch with us at London Funders. Our details will be on the website, or you'll know where to find us if you'd like to subscribe to that. And other than that, we're 5 minutes over. So as chair, I should probably end by just reiterating our thanks to the panel members who've joined us. So thank you to Cameron, Danny and Victoria, and to everyone else who's joined and interacted and asked questions. Yeah, we've really enjoyed it. So I hope you found it useful and have come away with a bit more learning around place-based giving in London. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Take care.